Good evening and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma and I'm the host of Atheist Torah Study. Today we're going to be talking about the Parsha Vayikra. Vayikra is the very first Parsha in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus is the very middle book of the Torah. It's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And Leviticus is generally understood as a book written uh, by or about the priests. So it has a lot of references to things that priests do in ancient Judaism. And so we'll be getting into it, the korbanot, the sacrifices. And I often joke that this is the parsha that made me want to become a vegetarian, because it's kind of like Slaughterhouse-Five. It's just it's like a bloody, it's a bloody, gory parsha, and it's a good parsha to talk about from the perspective of an atheist. So some of the issues here are um, animal sacrifice. That's a good one. I mean, does a why does a person or a society decide that murdering animals is somehow a way of connecting with their divine power? And like ritual obligation. There's a lot in here about the tools in which religions utilize in order to compel cooperation and obedience to authority, and to donating and sustaining to religious hierarchy. So there's a lot of good stuff in here for an atheist. Um, as I always say whenever I do this, I always try to look at it from both lenses, though. I mean, I look at it from the lens of an atheist, but I also look at it from the lens of a Jew. So there's another way to look at the Parsha where it's a way to think about sacrifice and under what conditions do you give of yourself to something bigger than yourself. And a really good one here that I think crosses the boundaries between atheist and Jew and all of humanity is what happens when a group neglects its responsibilities. Um, as I think is really clear that we've done with climate change. I mean, it's really clear that as a species, as a global community, we've really just fallen off the f f fallen off the direction that we needed to go in order to really deal with global climate change. And so now it's going to be a big mess, and it's not going to be pretty. So anyways, so this text deals with that sort of thing too, and it gives you some ideas for how to address it. Although I don't think it really is intended to address an entire global population, but it is meant to address like a group of people. So, anyways, let's go ahead and I'll just go ahead and start reading, and I'll comment on it as we go. So, Parsha Vayikra. God called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you present an offering of cattle to God, you shall choose your offering from the herd or from the flock. If your offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you shall make your offering a male without blemish. You shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in your behalf before God. You shall lay a hand upon the head of the burnt offering, that it may be acceptable in your behalf in expiation for you. The bull shall be slaughtered before God, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all sides of the altar that is at the tent of meeting. The burnt offering shall be flayed and cut up into sections. The sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire on the altar and lay out wood upon the fire. And Aaron's sons the priests shall lay out the sections with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. Its entrails shall be washed with water, and the priest shall turn the whole thing into smoke on the altar as a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to God. So that's what it says. So, it's again, it's another one of those parshas I think that a lot of atheists they turn to. They look at parshas like this and they just say, see, religion is just so primitive and backwards. And look at its origins here. I mean, look at this text. So I mean, you have to ask yourself a lot of questions about this, to even sort of come near to it. So, the first question I would ask is why was this so important to preserve in the text? I mean, why is this so at the beginning of Genesis, at least it's a good mythology. Maybe it's not a good mythology, but it's kind of a nice story. I mean, even as an atheist, I like the beginning of Genesis. I like the way that the world started. There's this deity making the world and making animals. It's a nice story. It feels like a mythology. But this is the beginning of the third book. So, the beginning of the second book is pretty dramatic too. I mean, it starts with the story of Moses and there's a baby and they put it in a basket and floated down the river and somebody found the baby and again, there's a story there. But here, the very first thing you have is you have a bull that then gets slaughtered, and then there's detailed instructions on how to cut up this animal they've just murdered, and what to do with all the different parts of his cut up body. So it's kind of different. I mean, it's really different from the start of the other two books. And it's like, I just wonder, like, why is this even in the book? I mean, what does this have to do with anything? I mean, it's like, I guess these guys, this is just what they did for a living, and they wanted to tell their story. I don't know. I mean, why would God, if there was a God, why would the God bother telling people how to cut up a dead animal? I mean, doesn't the God have better things to do, like solve global warming, deal with too many nuclear weapons on planet Earth, help heal hunger, disease, cure cancer? Think about all the things that God could be doing right now in this moment, if there ever really was a God. I mean, telling people where to find other life in the universe, helping scientists, oh, sorry, helping scientists understand and solve some of the fundamental questions we have about the origins of the universe. I don't know, ending wars. There's so many things that God could be doing. But here in this story, the God is like basically talking to Moses and then telling Moses, um, here's how you take care of here's it's like you're killing an animal, and it's like why are you doing this? I mean, what is this? What on earth does this have to do with anything? So we can look at the text to try to at least get some understanding of what the text is trying to say. So The text is, I mean, so a few things. Okay. I'm gonna kind of go backwards now, and I'm gonna start um kind of expanding a little bit what I'm trying to say. So, first of all, nobody does this anymore, but for a long time, people did do this. I mean, this was ritual animal sacrifice is something that has been done uh, in the ancient world for a long time. And it had a lot of different kinds of meanings to it. Just a minute. Anyways, so this wasn't this is something that was happening in the ancient world, animal sacrifice, but Jews don't do it now, obviously. Although if they ever built a third temple, maybe they would consider it. I don't know. There might be somebody who wants to do it. Um, but for a long time, this was considered the prescribed way of talking to the God. It was the way of communicating with the God. And it's like, why did people want to communicate with a God? Because they weren't sure what was happening in their life, what was going to happen next. Um, there was a lot of war going on all over the Levant in the Bronze Age. War was happening all the time. People were getting um, killed and land was taken, and there was a lot of there's the long history of warfare and violence. And one of the big reasons people made sacrifices was for safety and for protection. But in the Torah, people make sacrifices for very specific reasons. I mean, they make a sacrifice because they've done something wrong. They make a sacrifice to celebrate. They make a sacrifice um, for good. For hoping something good will happen. Also, people make a sacrifice if they've done something in the wrong order. So if they haven't done something properly or ritually. So there's a lot of reasons that people make sacrifices. And in this book of Leviticus, it talks about all the different ways that people can make sacrifices. It starts with the really biggest kind of sacrifice, sacrificing a bull, and then it goes all the way down to the small sacrifice, which is like giving some wheat or a pigeon. So, um, I mean the obvious stuff, the obvious atheist stuff here is this is a ritual, and the people who benefit from the ritual are the person who's making it. They benefit from it. Sometimes, if there's a third party involved, they might benefit from it if they're making tshuva. Or the priests generally always benefit from this. So this is a way of ensuring that the priestly class in this temple-based Judaism always have what they need in order to do their job. So that's kind of what the idea is about with all of this. It's I mean it's just another way of maintaining the religious institution. It's really not that different from, your Sunday morning preacher getting on television and, telling everybody that we need 10,000 new members today to pledge $20 each to help continue the work of this missionary church, or something like that. I mean, it's collecting money or collecting resources. So that's definitely part of what's going on here. But there's a lot more going on in the text. I mean, this text is dealing with the text is dealing with fear. It's dealing with fear and uncertainty. And it's dealing with it in a language and a currency that people at the time understood, which was animal sacrifice. I mean, animal sacrifice, it goes back to way back to prehistory. Oh, excuse me. It goes way back in prehistory to a time when people, I mean, they were killing animals, and it's like if you killed an animal, then like if you kill an animal, you really see what happens to it. I mean, it's it's cathartic. It's frightening. It's kind of overwhelming. Um, because an animal doesn't want to die, and animals will resist efforts to kill them. Even domesticated animals will, unless they just have no idea what's happening. Um, in a way, this kind of killing of animals, even though it seems really backwards and kind of, um, uh, you know, it just it seems almost pagan in a way. I mean, this idea of killing animals, making sacrifices to gods with your animals. I mean, it almost seems a little pagan now because what the rabbis did was after the second temple was destroyed at some point, um, oh, sorry, a little bit late here. At some point, they started to say, oh, let's pray instead of making sacrifices. And so they would consider their prayer and doing good deeds as a way of making an offering rather than bringing an animal to have it killed. But I mean, again, getting back to this, it's like, animals don't want to die. And killing an animal is a very traumatic experience. I mean, these people were constantly being traumatized. So maybe they were able to, maybe they're able to, maybe they're able to do this without feeling that moral pull, that pull on your heartstrings that would make you not want to murder Bambi. But um I think they probably felt it. I mean, this is a very bloody business. But there's also something about it that's very, very ancient. I mean, I think this goes all the way back to the very beginnings of the practice of religion. I mean, this idea of animal sacrifice is something that we find in other cultures. Of course, unfortunately, we also find human sacrifice in other cultures as well, which is quite barbaric. Sorry to use a loaded term, but it really is just, it's kind of hard to understand how any society could do human sacrifice. But the truth is that we have lots of evidence that cultures all around the world practice human sacrifice. So then that makes me think of, when people do human sacrifice now, not that we call it human sacrifice, but I mean, like, for instance, in Russia, when they send Russians off to die in Ukraine, I mean, aren't they really kind of sacrificing those human beings for the sake of their war? I mean, it's the same in any war, and even in any military action. Like in the United States, the recent choices to bomb the heck out of Iran, that leads to really terrible consequences. I mean, US military people die. The United States killed 176 Iranian girls. I mean, there's a cost to anything you do, and you can't really ignore it. I think that's part of what the text is trying to say here. I mean, the text is trying to connect you with something really deep about something really deep about the nature of human experience. I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen next. We don't know how our life is going to go. Um, and this is sort of like a way of grounding yourself. It's a way of connecting with that uncertainty. And I think that that uncertainty is kind of what this text is about. It's about how do you deal with that uncertainty in life? I mean, I think that as atheists, we have a great deal of certainty. And so I think some of the things that bother other people don't really bother atheists so much because since we know there isn't any God, if you're an atheist and you don't believe in any God, then you don't have to worry so much about the God's judgment. And you don't really have to worry about the idea of sin, other than when you think about how you treat people around you and how you treat yourself and how you serve or don't serve your community. I mean, and even with those things, I mean, I think that as an atheist, I would try to find other words to call it besides sin. Because I think that sin, which is kind of at the heart of this Parsha, it's a really loaded term. I mean, it considers worshiping the goddess to be a sin in this text. It considers worshiping the goddess to be a sin. It also tells you that you need to stone your children to death. So it's like it's telling you all these weird things that don't really make for a good book. And it's not light reading. But there's I don't know exactly how we do it as Jews, but it's like there's parts of the text that we just ignore. I mean, we don't pay attention to that because it's not relevant to our life today. And even if it were, we wouldn't do it like that. So, I don't know what it is in Jewish tradition that just shifts things, but it's like Jewish tradition shifts a lot. You know, I mean, Jewish tradition shifted after the destruction of the Second Temple during the conquest of the Romans. And then it changed again once it became something rooted in Gemara and Mishnah and Talmud. And then it became something else when it was written as Zohar. And now we're in modernity and it's something very different. I mean, I haven't read a good book yet written by a Jew that kind of explains what the modern expression of Judaism is. I mean, what are we now? I mean, we know what we are because we can experience it culturally and we talk to each other. But are we, is there a continuous line of um, succession in terms of how we experience a set of ideas up through the present? So is being Jewish now, or is being an atheist even now, the same thing as being an atheist 500 years ago when the Zohar was written, or 500 years ago when well, Spinoza was the 17th century, I think, 17th century. So let's go back to Spinoza, a famous Jew. I mean, is the way that Judaism is practiced today analogous to how Judaism was practiced during Spinoza's time, or was it a completely different kind of Judaism? Those are some of the questions I think that you have to ask yourself when you're looking at these texts. So anyway, so a few things about the text, going back to the beginning. So the Vayikra, if you look at the Hebrew, it has a small aleph, and I almost never talk about the Hebrew. I mean, I know a little Hebrew, but not much. But anyways, so the very first word, it has a small aleph at the end of it. It's what is that? Um, yeah, it has a small aleph at the name of Moses. And the reason that the small aleph is there is because it's supposed to indicate the humility of Moses. And so the Torah is lifting up the quality of humility as a positive quality. In other words, this character, this Moses person, is so humble that he doesn't even want, like he wants a small a instead of a big A in the very first word of the Parsha, because he doesn't want to be misread as thinking too highly of himself or like being in places where he didn't really belong, you know. Anyway, so that's the story. I mean, I think I don't know if there's an analog in atheism. I mean, there kind of is. I mean, I think about, so as an atheist, I mean, I think about the recent experience with the story of David Silverman. David Silverman was, for many years, he was the national spokesperson for American atheists. And he even wrote his most recent book that he wrote while he was still involved with the atheist community of American atheists was Firebrand Atheism. That was his book. And he was traveling around the country promoting his book, Firebrand Atheism, when he got caught up in a sexual scandal. And he eventually was removed from any kind of representation for American atheists. He went on to become a right-wing atheist blogger, podcaster, commentator. Um, and I mean, I have complicated feelings about David Silverman because I read his book, Firebrand Atheism. I thought it was a great book. And, I think everybody should read it. But I also think that, the things that got him in trouble were sexual scandal type things. It it was something about it was some kind of a sex scandal. I mean I remember the details, but I don't know if I remember them well enough to respond to them verbatim. But the point of the story is that David Silverman did not lack any ego. David Silverman had no problem getting out in front in public, being in the spotlight, and promoting atheism. Now, you may say, well, David Silverman, he wasn't a humble person. He was a very out there kind of person who really wanted people to consider what he had to say. But he was just doing his job, I mean, he was speaking for a certain kind of truth in the moment. And so I don't know, it's like, but then he got in trouble. And it's like, he got in trouble over things that a lot of men get in trouble over. I mean, sexual stuff. It's just, it happens to a lot of men. I mean, it wasn't just David Silverman. There isn't any story like that with Moses. Although interestingly, recently we had a Moses type character, Caesar Chavez, who has been dead a long time. I mean, he's been dead for many, many years, and yet his legacy lives on. And recently, some reporter released a story basically talking about how Dolores Huerta didn't report on Cesar Chavez's womanizing and the way in which he took advantage of his position in order to get sexual favors from women within his organization, which is quite unfortunate, because the organization that Cesar Chavez's work represents is the work of the United Farm Labor Workers and their efforts to unionize. So it's like here's another character, kind of like Moses, who was willing to be in the public spotlight, was willing to be kind of the point of contact person, the person who you noticed. Um, and was considered to be of really high moral standing. And yet here this person is being accused of doing something much, much less than moral. So, it's just, I mean, this idea of Moses' humility, it's not a bad idea to think about for like anyone who you admire. Like to think about, what kind of a person are they? What are their ethics? So like, I mean, besides, I mean, I have a lot of people that I consider heroes and people who I really respect. I mean, I have two women rabbis who are members of my synagogue, and I look up to both of them. I mean, I look to both of them as leaders. And it's like, I'm an atheist and they're not atheists, and they know that. And they're still nice people. I mean, any nice person is somebody that I look up to. I mean, I definitely look up to any nice person. It's like who who do you look up to? I mean, who do you consider to be a leader? And I've got a really long list. I mean, I've got a long list of people that I respect and that I look to for quote unquote leadership and for advice. And as an atheist, so I mean, and it all depends on what area of life you're talking about. I mean, are you looking at somebody that you admire for your profession, or somebody that you admire for in your religion, or in your personal life? Um, so anyways, um, so that's the story about the small olive. And then there's the issue with the bull. The bull they start with a bull. So they start from a bull and they work their way down from a bull to a goat to a sheep to a pigeon to some grain. And it's like each one of those is a specific korbanot, and it's meant for a specific purpose. Sorry, it's meant for a specific purpose. So like here on this very first korbanot, it says, I'm going to read some of it again. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you brings an offering of cattle to God. So, I mean, not everybody in the ancient world had cattle too. I mean, cattle were expensive. So this is already starting off as a little bit of an elite story. Um, an offering of cattle to God, you shall choose your offering from among the herd or the flock. So that assumes you have a flock of animals, which most people don't. If your offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you shall make um, your offering a male without blemish. And that means that you're looking for the cow or, bull that doesn't have any blemishes, which I guess means like other colors or something. I'm not really sure. As I was reading this week, I was thinking, well, so they started with a bull, so they're thinking of like one of the biggest animals they can think of. I mean, they could go bigger. You could try to sacrifice a hippopotamus, or you could even go bigger. You could go to an elephant or a woolly mammoth elephant, um, or a whale, I guess. I mean, you just they get bigger because this is already it starts off big. But I don't know, there's something, when I was studying for the Parsha this week and thinking about it. I mean, there's something about killing an animal and something about life that is not something that can really easily be explained, you know. And this system that's being set up gets at the core of a lot of human activity. It gets kind of at the core of like, here's people who they want to gather. Um, they're not sure what to do with themselves. They feel bad about some of the things that they've done, and they want to know how they can make things right again with the world and with their God. And this is sort of telling them how to do it. So from that perspective, I mean, it's understandable. I mean, these people, these they're acting out really old evolutionary scripts in a way. So for my practice this week and preparing for this Torah portion, I did a lot of review of the science of predator and prey relationships. And one of my favorite resources I went to hear Nick Lane being interviewed by Lexi Friedman. Is that the name of it? I think it's Lex Friedman. Was interviewing Nick Lane. It was a really long interview. It was like 3.5 hours. And I listened to about two-thirds of it. But it was really great because I mean he was sort of talking about predation. And apparently predation, we can definitely see it in even single-celled bacteria. We can see certain kinds of predation. Uh, Maybe not single-celled bacteria, but definitely very, very simple life forms have this quality. And so there's something about predation that seems to be really foundational to human existence. And actually, another one of the sites I reviewed talked about what it would be like to live in a world where basically everything was a predator and nothing was prey. Or maybe something was prey, but the things that were prey were also predators. And when this person did a computer review of this idea, what would happen if everything was a predator, he discovered that like very quickly, like within a week or so, the entire system would just completely collapse because there wouldn't really be much of anything to eat. And when you think about it, almost everything in nature is based on one thing eating another thing. And the only example in nature of something that isn't quite like that is photosynthesis. Because photosynthesis is simply, a plant or something green taking advantage of the sun. I mean, we get sunlight every day for many, many hours. And here's a story about something taking sunshine, which is free, and using it to make energy and then to store that energy. And that's the very foundation of all life on Earth. So it goes way back in evolutionary times. As a matter of fact, another story that Nick Lane talked about, which really fascinates me a lot, is the story of how the first archaea came into existence, and it was when one bacteria entered another bacteria, and as far as we know, that's only happened once. And when it happened, it really created the foundation of all life on Earth. I mean, basically, all life on Earth comes from this one this one act of it's kind of cannibalism, but it kind of isn't because the mitochondrial, that's not the right word. The bacteria that was consumed by the other bacteria, it still continued to live within the bacteria that became its it's when it became part of that bacteria. So anyways, let's see, where are we? So I read the let me read some more Torah. We just read about the bowl and the bloody bowl. I think we read about the entrails, yeah, Okay, so the next one. If your offering for a burnt offering is from the flock of sheep or goats, you shall make your offering a male without blemish. It shall be slaughtered before God on the north side of the altar, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall dash its blood against all sides of the altar. When it has been cut up into sections, the priest shall lay them out with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. The entrails and legs shall be washed with water. The priest shall offer up and turn the whole into smoke on the altar. It is a burnt offering, an offering by fire, pleasing odor to God. Okay, so this pleasing odor to God thing, it's like, okay, so I looked that up too. I was trying to figure out like when in the ancient world did the mythologies describe the gods as smelling, you know? And if a god can smell, then what is it smelling? Can it smell everything? Is it an infinite smelling god? Or can it only smell like what's in front of it? So, I mean, if it can smell, does that mean it has a nose? Does God have a nose? In the story, if it can smell and it's a pleasing odor, it seems like then the God can smell. But the Torah teaches that God isn't represented by an object. The Torah teaches that God is kind of an idea. So, but here, the God is very direct. It's like the God is telling Moses exactly how to do animal sacrifice and when to do it. And one of the only things that's missing here is, oh, the thought just went out of my head. Okay, well, anyways, let's move on. If you're offering, oh, yeah, well, we were talking about God being able to smell. And it's like, I think this is, I don't know. I was thinking about it today. I think that this Parsha and I mean this entire book in the middle of the Torah was some sort of a compromise that was made at the time. Like the people who wrote the book or the people around this time, they made this compromise and they said, well, I mean, because to me, this looks like the old religion. It's like, here's the old religion going back hundreds of years, and here's how we did animal sacrifice. And then at some point, the Hasmoneans like come to power as part of the whole Maccabean revolution. And they write this text and they say, oh, well, here's this text that we're going to use to create a kind of national identity. Um, but in order to do that, we have to make some compromises. And one of the compromises that they made was that they kept in parts of the story in the Torah and the Tanakh that are really kind of essentially pagan. I mean, to me, they're pagan. Maybe they aren't to other people, but they made this compromise. And I guess they did the compromise so that, well, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why they would do a compromise like that, but it's just a thought I had, just an idea. Anyways, I'm gonna take a little break and I'll be right back for the last 15 minutes. Anyways, hi, I'm back. So, we've talked about this. One thing that I haven't talked about yet from an atheist perspective is how do you deal with, as atheists, how do we deal with issues around punishment, around like how do you recognize when there's wrongdoing? You know, and I'm not sure. I mean, I think that, I think that evolution gives us something to work with. It definitely gives us something. But, as a society, we also have a certain set of expectations that come from being part of our particular society, whatever our society is. So, and there's not much control you have over that. I mean, you sort of have some control in that you can leave a society that you were born into and you can move into another society if that's more your style. And you're able to do that in an environment where that's permitted. Um, but otherwise, you're kind of stuck with these things that you were raised with, and you have to figure out, what do I want to do with this? How am I going to work with this? So, anyways, but I mean, you still have to figure out how to have a moral life. You still have to figure out how to have a moral life and what to do. And I think that evolution provides some of the picture, but it doesn't provide everything. And I think that the more that we understand about evolution and about power and about judgment, the better we'll be at being able to decode some of this information and have it, kind of make sense to us as atheists because, we don't really know exactly where our ethics come from. I mean, they probably come from thousands of generations of group bonding, of social bonding and group bonding that created these unspoken rules that were kind of understood and they were part of our inheritance as a species. But now we have these things that are much more complicated. I mean, we have what I started out talking about. We have global warming. We have the constant threat of nuclear war, which is always kind of dangling there in the background as like the most horrible option imaginable. And then, of course, we have all of these regional wars that are always happening at any time, almost anywhere on the planet. So we have all of these examples of how we don't know how to be holy and we don't know how to be righteous. And we don't know, I mean, holy and righteous are really, really loaded religious terms. But I mean, I think that they reflect how a lot of people think. Um, but we don't seem to know how to, as a culture, make teshuva and do repair. So there's some of us who talk about it, but it doesn't seem like we really understand en masse how to do it. And a lot of that has to do with, the difference between how we think as individuals and how we think as groups. But one of the really interesting things about this Parsha, about this Torah portion, is that it does think about what do you do as a group if you sin, if you do something really terrible. So if you heat up the planet so much that it's going to kill like 90% of all species on Earth, then you're doing something wrong. And how are you going to make up for that? I mean, from my perspective, if you respond to an act of warfare or an act of aggression by basically destroying the entire country of the people who did the terrible thing to you, then I have to ask myself, where are you getting your ethics from? I mean, where do we get our ethics from? I mean, I think probably we go through a lot of life not really knowing in most situations how to deal with it ethically. I mean, so, like going back to global warming, I mean, an ethical thing to do with global warming would be to just not drive or else to switch over to an electric vehicle. But for a lot of people, even if they did want to do that, electric vehicles are so expensive. I mean, they're like between 60,000 and $120,000. And for somebody working on minimum wage, good luck ever buying anything, let alone just an old crappy car that runs on gasoline. And, part of the reason that our world is like that now, part of the reason that Portland's like that now is because we've neglected in our responsibility. We've neglected in our responsibility of taking care of each other and of taking care of our planet and taking care of the people on the planet. I mean, we've neglected those opportunities. And so now what we're left with is we're left with this big mess that we have. And the Torah doesn't really tell you exactly how to deal with that kind of a problem, but it does get you to think about it because it provides all of these other examples of things that you would need to think about if you had done something wrong at this time in the ancient world. So those are some of my thoughts on the Torah portion. There's about 7 minutes left, so I'll just do a little bit more, maybe 5 minutes actually. By the way, I want to dedicate this Torah study to the memory of two people who have passed recently, who are people that I really did care about. And so I want to dedicate this study to the memory of Grant Houston. Grant Houston was a peace activist. I believe he was a member of Veterans for Peace, and he passed away recently. And another person that I want to remember is Emma Santiago Antonia, who also passed away recently at the age of I think she was 93, so she had a long and fulfilling life. And may her memory be a blessing. So let's read some more with the last 4 minutes. Let's see. Um, if your offering to God is a burnt offering of birds, you shall choose your offering from turtle doves or pigeons. The priest shall bring it to the altar, pinch off its head, and turn it to smoke on the altar, and its blood shall be drained out against the side of the altar. Mhm. So that's what they did with uh, little, little parakeet, the African gray pigeon. He shall remove its crop with its contents and cast it into the fire of ashes at the east side of the altar. Anyways, I think that's about all we'll have time to read. So there's talking about how you can kill a bird. And I love birds. Birds are one of the animals that survived the asteroid 65 million years ago. Birds are one of the animals that survived along with small mammals. So anyways, I think that's pretty cool. So thanks so much for joining me. My name is Emma. This has been Atheist Torah Study, and we've been reading the very first book of Leviticus, the vegetarian portion called Vayikra. And I hope that I hope you've learned a little bit, or just maybe found me entertaining in my ramblings. But this is kind of how my brain works, and these are some of the things that I think about. Passover is coming up, Pesach, and a lot of Jews get together during Pesach, and they will read a Haggadah, and then they'll have a Seder, a meal. A Haggadah is the story of well, it asks some questions, and it tells the story of the Exodus. And people can write their own Haggadahs. They can make any kind of Haggadah they want. I'd like to make a Haggadah someday that's like an anti-prison Haggadah, an anti-prison, anti-police, anti-authoritarian Haggadah. I would really enjoy writing one of those. But anyways, if you are celebrating Pesach or Passover, um, I hope you have a really nice one. And we'll see you next week for another edition of Atheist Torah Study. I remember there's something you're supposed to say to somebody on Pesach, but I forget what the words are. Anyways, thanks for watching.